Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Real Stuff podcast. Today's episode is going to be a partial deep dive into my nursing journey the second time around with baby number 2, and also a partial chit chat with the board certified lactation consultant that I worked with, Lauren Horowitz. So I'm about to introduce her onto the show. She is a pediatric nurse practitioner and also an IBCLC, that stands for International Board Certified Lactation Consultant. I want to call out what that acronym means because we kind of just dive into using it in the episode without defining it. Lauren works at Milk Street Lactation, which is a company that is owned by a woman named Beth. And Beth is actually who I was originally introduced to and who I originally started working with. But when Coco was born and I called her, she was traveling. So she sent me Lauren, and then Lauren and I ended up becoming really good friends. We do get into it a little bit in the episode, but she was completely covered by my insurance, and she talks about what insurance she takes, and she sees clients virtually as well. So if you're interested in working with her, I highly recommend her. And one thing I wanted to call out in this intro is that I realized upon listening back to the episode that we started talking a little bit about collecting colostrum and how some people do that during pregnancy. And then we never really finished that part of the conversation. We never circled back to it. And I was planning on talking about how in my pregnancy with Coco, I did work with Beth from Milk Street to learn how to collect my colostrum. So we basically had a virtual call where I had my boob out on the call. It was like a boob Zoom. And she was teaching me exactly how to squeeze my nipples to get colostrum out and exactly how to collect it in the little silicone collectors. The brand I used for collecting was the Haka brand. And it's like this little silicone tube that you just squeeze your boob, squeeze the tube, and then as soon as the colostrum's coming out, you release and it sucks it into the tube. Actually, pre-Coco's birth, I was able to collect like 4 or 5 full containers of that. It's only milliliters, like it's not that much, but I still have it in the freezer. It's colostrum that you can offer your baby anytime they're sick or if they just need a little extra nutrition. It's really nutrient dense, filled with some of the best stuff, and I have it still saved for her. But anyway, the colostrum's not the point of this video. I just realized I never got back into it, so wanted to share that in the intro. But let's just dive into this conversation with my lactation consultant, Lauren Horowitz.
Hi, Luce. Thanks so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm so happy to have you here. And I think you stand out as a lactation consultant in my mind because of your, I don't even know the word to use, liberal views on feeding, just the way that you are so accepting of everyone's desires and how everyone wants to feed. And even you yourself combo fed your kids.
Yep.
So I will in this episode dive into a little bit about how we work together and what the experience is like. I also want to just make it personal and talk a little bit about my 2 journeys because they were so different. And I'm hoping for people out there who even aren't pregnant right now or aren't in the family planning years, maybe they'll listen to this and find it fascinating to learn a bit about how this works.
Honestly, I knew nothing about breastfeeding with my first. So with my first, I think I told you, I tell everyone, I did literally everything wrong with my first because I preach it all the time. How are you supposed to know? How are you supposed to know anything? Everybody thinks you just pop the baby on the breast and it's instinctual. And yes, we're all mammals. So certainly a lot of it is, but there's so much more science and information to know about how to actually breastfeed, how milk making works, the process of everything. Everyone has a very different experience with their second than their first because you just don't know.
There's so much about the feeding in general, not even breastfeeding, but even just the bottle feeding that is such an enigma during pregnancy.
Completely.
I mean, I remember with Milo, I was just so confused. How many ounces am I supposed to be putting in the bottle to begin with? How many ounces do you give a baby? Then, of course, it just sort of happens and you just sort of learn how much they're taking and then you start filling the bottles to that amount. And with your second, I want to say it's like, okay, you've got this, you get it. But I honestly felt like with my second, it's just like you're starting over from scratch again. And you're like, I forget everything.
You black out. You forget everything.
I want to go back to when I was pregnant with Milo. I always knew I wanted to breastfeed. And I always felt like it was something that I was going to at least try. Of course, everyone says, you don't know how it's going to go for you. You don't even know if you're going to make a robust supply of milk. But I was very interested in breastfeeding. Even before Milo was born, when I was just pregnant, I was finding little dried bits of almost
Colostrum.
discharge. Yeah, I
Yeah,
guess it was colostrum.
it was. Yeah.
I remember thinking, wow, there's stuff coming out of my nipples before I've even had this baby. And I
Yep.
felt like that was my body just prepping. Is that a normal thing that happens to people?
Totally normal. So colostrum is made in the breast starting when the baby is just 16 weeks gestation. The recommendation is not to express it until 37 weeks because there is a very small chance that it can put you into labor. But what you can see between week 16 when it starts being produced and birth is a little bit, it's not discharge, it's actually colostrum. Yellow, orange tinged, maybe like crusty by the time you find it. So is that normal? Yes. Does it mean anything about your milk supply? No. You can have no colostrum at all. You actually can work with an IBCLC and try to express colostrum. And some women are actually not able to produce colostrum prenatally.
So we can get into the colostrum collecting a little later because that's something I didn't even attempt to do with Milo. And then I was able to collect it with Coco, and I collected a lot. Just to go back to when Milo was born, as I was saying, I was experiencing some discharge coming out throughout the pregnancy. And then when he was born, I popped him on my boob to see what his latch looked like and what happened. And he basically started latching right away. And, the hospital had a lactation consultant that came into the room to look at his latch. And I also had a different lactation consultant in New York City come to my apartment a couple of days after he was born to help me figure out how to put my pump on and look at his latch and see how many ounces he took in a feed. And with him, I didn't really know much about what was right in terms of when should I be nursing him? When do I need to pump? How much milk should I be building up as a backlog in my freezer? Basically, with Milo, I found myself nursing him and then following up every nursing session, almost every nursing session, by putting the pump on and pumping to get some more milk out. And that was because I would nurse him until I felt like he was done sucking, like he wasn't getting anything else out. But as soon as he got off, he would start eating his hands again and acting like he was hungry. And he had trouble pulling it out of my boob. But if I put the pump on, I was able to get some more out with that LV or the Spectra or something. And I would pull out more milk for him and offer it to him in a bottle. And he would always finish the extra milk in the bottle. So that was telling me, you got to keep making more milk for this kid because the amount he could suck out is not enough. And so I was on this journey of basically double feeding. Like every feed was a breastfeed and then a pump.
And a bottle feed too, right?
Yeah, sorry. Like every single feed was the breastfeed and then pump into a bottle and provide it for him right then.
That's actually called triple feeding.
Okay, so
There's
swear
a
to
term
God,
for this. Yeah.
I think my body I've said this before, but I actually think my body must have thought that I had quadruplets in front of me with the amount of milk that I was taking out. This is where I want to just get into the science for a second here.
Yeah, sure.
My understanding is that milk in your boobs is all about supply and demand. And basically, the more milk that you can take out and remove from your breasts, the more you're telling your body to make. Is that correct?
Yeah, so definitely. The overarching principle of breastfeeding is, or milk making in general, the more milk we remove, the more milk we make. So going back to what you were doing in the triple feeding department, you were heavily increasing your supply. It's super important when baby's on the breast to look at what are they actually doing. Milo might have been on the breast and he might have been suckling, but if he's not swallowing, then he's not eating, right? So here's what I would imagine was happening with Milo. He was on the breast, he was swallowing a good amount, but then he's, let's say, 6 days old, he falls asleep at the breast. This is normal. So our two overarching goals of breastfeeding are we want the baby to come to the breast and get fed, and we want to remove the milk. Because if we remove the milk, we'll make more milk. And if we're feeding, he's doing both at the same time. If he's feeding and swallowing, he's removing milk. For Milo, you found that you needed to feed him a bottle of pumped milk after he already removed. So what you were basically doing, which was what you should have been doing because you were a good mom, you needed to ensure the two goals, right? That you were feeding him So you breastfed him, but then you offered him a bottle because you, as a good mom, are feeding him. And the other goal is that you are removing the milk because you know that in order to make more milk, we need to remove the milk. So what can happen though, so triple feeding is very, 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 very effective in increasing your milk supply, but it's a very taxing, draining, exhausting. You're basically taking, 30-ish minutes to feed, offering him a bottle, pumping for however many minutes. Some moms it's 5, some moms it's 30. It's very, very tiring. It takes 90 minutes maybe, and then he's got to be fed again, within the 2 to 3 hours from beginning of feed to beginning of feed.
Yep.
So you have a minute break, or it feels like, and then you do it all again. I always say I like to kind of handhold my clients when they are triple feeding to make sure that you're okay, because it's not supposed to be forever. It's supposed to be very short-lived. If clients do triple feeding for weeks on end, they end up feeding often the fridge or the freezer, which we can definitely come back to. We really want to try to keep our supply in line with his demand. So if he is requesting, let's say, 2 or 3 ounces per feed, we don't really want to remove that much more than 2 to 3 ounces per feed, because when we remove milk, it tells our brain, Lucie, the breasts are empty. Milo just took all of that milk. Now we need to refill.
All right, Lauren, I wish that I had been working with you during this time to handhold me, because when you just said, I recommend people do this for weeks
Not
max.
for weeks, a few days.
Yeah, when you were saying I recommend people do this for short spurts of time, I fed like this for months.
Oh my
and
gosh.
If I'm being honest, my experience of nursing Milo, though it was very positive in the sense that there was no pain and I felt it was, quote, easy to produce milk for him, my experience gives me a touch of PTSD because of the way that this consumed my life and my days
100%.
and my hours. I would start a feed. I would nurse him. As soon as the feed was over, I was popping on the pump. I was pouring whatever he was going to take in a bottle and giving him that again as his second top off feed, while I was then storing the rest of the milk and labeling it and putting it in my storage system in the fridge,
washing
freezer,
everything.
Washing, sterilizing, sanitizing the pump parts and the bottle parts. And then what felt like 20 minutes later, it was time to start his next feed. It was really a full-time 24-hour cycle, never-ending day. I think about that often because when I went into my second pregnancy, I actually do feel like I delayed getting pregnant for the second time farther than I maybe would have if I hadn't had that nursing experience, because the memory of what my life was going to be like once I had a newborn, if I was to feed them the same way, which I sort of just assumed I would do it all over again, that memory made me so not excited to have a baby again. Because once again, although the journey was positive and it, for some people, they feel they can't produce milk, which I assume is a whole other disappointing ballgame and stressful in its own way. But for me during this time with Milo, the amount of milk I was producing was not only causing my entire day to be eaten up, but it was actually eating up my body and my nutritional supplies. I was at my lowest weight. I was my smallest, most depleted version of myself. My freezer and fridge were so stocked up that even with the storage system where you transfer milk from the fridge to the freezer and how long it lasts for, I ended up donating 150 ounces to the New York Milk Bank because my freezer did not have enough space to even hold it to give to my son in time. When it came time to do it all over again, I sort of made this declaration to myself very, very early on when I got pregnant with Coco. And I said, you know what? I actually think I'm going to do no breastfeeding this time. I think I'm just going straight to formula because the thought of doing that again puts me in such a negative mental headspace.
You're not alone in that feeling. I think there's a lot of moms out there that have whatever the situation is with the first. I've worked with a lot of moms that have had, some form of PTSD, which is absolutely a real thing. You have a physiological response sometimes when you turn that pump on with your second child. And it's like, oh my God, the hours I spent with this pump. A lot of moms that don't have enough milk are like, wow, what I would do to have Lucie Fink's freezer stash. And as a mom myself who did not ever have enough milk because I actually had a breast reduction, there are so many moms out there, including myself, they're like, wow, to have lots of milk, But you can speak to the fact that it's not always sunshine and rainbows when you have too much milk.
And to your point about babies in those early weeks taking something like 2 to 3 ounces per feed every 2 to 3 hours, when you say pumping to completion or removing way more than you need, just to give people an idea, at a time when Milo was eating something like 3 ounces of milk per feed, I was sitting there removing 5 ounces from each boob. I would
Oh my
get
gosh.
10 ounces of milk very quickly with my LV. Like that pump loves my boobs.
Yeah.
And I would pop it on. I would get out 2 full tanks, which is 10 ounces. With me doing that every 2.5 to 3 hours, I am literally removing 5 times what he's actually eating. So screw the quadruplets. What's 5 kids? Quintuplets.
Yeah. If you could have gone back in time, right? If for any other mom that's listening, I just want to be clear on what the goal is. And the goal is, in a perfect world, you're making exactly what they need or maybe a little bit more. Because who doesn't want a little bit more for, your anxiety, for your comfort? Let's say baby goes through their growth spurt. I'm totally on board with what they need to a little bit more. But if you think back to a million years ago, when people gave birth in the wild and the baby, there was no formula, there were no breast pumps, there were no lactation consultants, right? Baby came to the breast and they removed what they needed, period. Mom made what baby removed, period. They didn't make more because there were no pumps, and they didn't make less because if they made less, baby would come to the breast more frequently and they would make up for it. Now, if there was a medical condition, which certainly there are many medical conditions that can affect your milk supply, or maybe there's a surgical, history, back in the day, someone else would feed
Someone
the baby.
else would nurse your baby. Exactly.
Right. So triple feeding is an incredible, efficient way to increase your milk supply, but it is not forever because it can drive you into the ground. And we also don't want it to drive you into crazy, crazy, crazy oversupply.
So obviously everyone's goal with nursing is different. And we had a night nurse who was with our kids for those early weeks of their lives. And so for that reason, my personal opinion is if I'm going to be paying for someone to be with the baby overnight to feed the baby, what I'm paying for is for me to be able to sleep during that time.
Sure.
But when your body is on this breastfeeding schedule all day, it doesn't just shut off at night. So
it does not shut off at night.
You do have the need, at least in those early days, to kind of similar to how you're doing it all day on an every few hour schedule, your boobs are going to wake you up either from leaking or from hurting, being engorged, and tell you it's time to remove milk. And so what I was doing in my Milo days was staying in my room by myself. He didn't come into my room. He was with the nurse. But I would wake up basically every 3 hours throughout the night and put on the pumps. And once again, from the start, I didn't know any of the stuff you had just told me about taking out the exact amount that the baby's probably eating at that time. Instead, I was putting on my pump and pumping until my boobs were completely drained and soft. So another 10 ounces basically every 3 hours overnight while I was paying for this nurse. And it wasn't until I was in hindsight that I looked back that I realized, wow, with baby number 2, when I pay for this nurse to be there overnight with the baby, the point of me doing that is so that I can sleep from the entire night and not wake up to pump. I remember asking you before the baby came, how soon can I achieve that goal? Like, how quickly can I get to a point where I'm just up nursing the baby throughout the daytime and then at night I can go to sleep and sleep through the whole night? Everyone seemed to tell me that yes, that goal is achievable. You can get to a point where you are sleeping through the night and not waking up to pump, but it's going to take some time as your milk supply is coming in. It's not something that you're going to be doing, the first 2 weeks that the baby's born.
Yes, that's very correct. In the beginning, the first 12-ish weeks, the endocrine system is what is driving your milk removal. So it's very hormonally based. It takes about 12-ish weeks, 8 to 12 weeks, that then it's switched to autocrine, which means it's more of a supply and demand. So for you came from a history of it's your second baby. So in general, with the second baby, it is easier to make milk. And you were coming from a place of having an oversupply, a history of an oversupply. So your situation was a little bit different. But in general, you really want to try as a first-time mom, if your goal is to make a full milk supply, it's really not the best idea to wean before that switch happens. If your goal is to wean, I'm happy to help you wean from week 2, whatever it is that you want. But if your goal is to make, as a first-time mom, the most milk that you possibly can make, then usually the recommendation is to wait a little bit longer than you might think, because you want to be able to make that robust milk supply before you start weaning, to then tailor it to, with an IBCLC, where you want to land.
Last year, right around this time, sicknesses seemed to be making a constant loop through our family. And now with a toddler and a newborn, I know how exhausting it can be to try to keep everyone healthy during this time of year. But this year, I do feel like I have a couple secret weapons to provide some relief from that congestion that I know we're going to get. And that is the Naväge Baby Aspirator and the Micro Mist Inhaler. So the Naväge Baby Aspirator is a rechargeable aspirator. It uses gentle suction to clear out mucus. It even has a 40% larger collection cup than some of the other leading brands. And it has some anti-backfill features to keep everything clean and to keep the motor protected. My favorite part of this is that it plays calming music while it works, which is really helpful to keep a baby relaxed during this process. Plus, the tips are silicone, they're dishwasher safe, and BPA free, which makes cleanup so easy. And then there's the Naväge Micro Mist Inhaler, which sprays a drug-free sterile saline solution to help break down congestion while simultaneously moisturizing and soothing a kid's upper respiratory system. It's incredibly effective and it lasts 50% longer than any other leading inhalers. And I love having this on hand because it gives me peace of mind knowing I have a reliable tool to help my little one breathe easier. Parenting is already hard, so make your life easier and order the new Naväge Baby Aspirator and the inhaler today. Trust me, you will thank me for this tip. My listeners can order directly from my exclusive URL, which is naväge.com/realstuff, where you'll find full product details and you can grab both of these products. That's NAVAGE.com/realstuff. Don't wait, order now at naväge.com/realstuff. So now let's get into the actual goals and give nitty-gritty details of times of day and numbers and whatnot. With Milo, at around 8 weeks, I'm just going to start from the 8-week mark, but around there, I got him on a daytime feeding schedule of eating every 4 hours. I'm pretty sure he was doing 7, 11,
he was on
3,
4,
and
not
7.
3.
Yeah.
Okay.
We followed a sleep training method that at 8 weeks, you put them on every 4 hours and you offer, he was taking like 6 to 8 ounces every 4 hours. And then overnight, as I said, I was waking up probably twice every 3 hours or so to remove milk. After a little bit of time, like once we got him sleep trained and he was no longer eating anything over the night, I ended up weaning over the night by just slowly over time decreasing the amount of time that I was pumping, which for me was also decreasing the amount of ounces that were coming out during that time, until I was able to kind of stretch it until I made it through the whole night without waking up to pump. With Coco, as I said, when I got pregnant, I sort of had that moment of, do I even want to nurse at all? And if I'm being honest, I remember having friends who, when I had Milo and I was in this crazy breastfeeding journey, friends who had had babies just around the same time as me and had just chosen from day one to formula feed. They did stuff in those early days to intentionally stop their milk from coming in hot. So they literally put ice packs and took, I don't know, what was that? What are you supposed to take? Sudafed or something?
Sudafed, peppermint, Cabo cream.
Yeah, the Cabo cream.
Ibuprofen,
they were putting
ice.
cabbage leaves in their boobs, whatever. And they didn't have any supply. And I remember looking at their early postpartum experience and seeing it in stark contrast to mine and feeling a twinge of jealousy of, wow, they're just having such a different experience here. And yes, I'm happy I'm doing this. And yes, there's a part of me that likes doing this, but the other part of me is like, wow, wouldn't motherhood be so much more fun? And wouldn't this whole experience just be so much better if I wasn't doing this the way I'm doing it? So going into having the second baby, as I said, for a hot second, I declared, we're going full formula. Then during my pregnancy, my body started changing. I started to see the those colostrum discharge
I can do this
again. I thought, oh, my body wants to do this. I had a moment of guilt of, why would I stop my body from doing something that it's trying so hard to do? Anyway, my final takeaway was, listen, I got to see what happens when this baby comes. But I think what I want to do is and I was calling this, people have heard this on my podcast, I was calling this breastfeeding light. And I said, what I want to do is I want to breastfeed this baby when she's feeding. I want to only give her the amount of milk that she needs. And I only want my body to make the exact or around the exact amount of milk that she is actually eating.
Love that.
And my other two goals were, one, as soon as possible, no more waking up at night. I do not want to be waking up twice at night to pump when I'm paying for a night nurse to be here. And number two, by the 2-month mark, if possible, I would love to find a lactation consultant who can help me get to a space where my body is making milk for this baby and I can nurse or pump for this baby at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. Not at all during the day in between that, and then not at all overnight. That's kind of a big ask to be like, as soon as possible, I want to have a great supply twice a day. That's it. And nothing in between. And I just, it's a lot of question marks of how are your boobs going to respond to that? How's your body going to respond to that? Is that going to work as you start weaning off of the middle of the day feeds and the nighttime pump sessions? Is the supply at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. going to totally disappear? So I want to talk about exactly what I did to achieve the goal, because spoiler alert, I achieved the goal and here we are. Coco's 9-10 weeks. And I'm going to start with literally from the day Coco was born. I said, my plan right now is I'm going to put her on the boob when it's time to nurse, and I am not pumping afterwards. I'm not doing any follow-up pump sessions. The only time actually that I would even use a pump at all during the daytime would be if it was a clear feed time and I was actually just not with the baby. And I was like,
you pump to replace a feed.
Replacing a feed, exactly. Actually, I remember one thing I was doing early on was between every single feed, even though I was just feeding her and I wasn't pumping extra, I was really nervous that I was just going to have this super supply that came out of nowhere, even without me doing much. So I was actually wearing cold compresses in my bra all day between every feed, because my understanding is that warmth increases supply and cold cools it down.
Warmth increases blood flow, which therefore increases inflammation in the breast. So cold is the opposite. If we're feeling like our breasts are really full or inflamed, that's why we would want cold.
So yeah, I was sitting with cold all day because I just wanted to keep things calm in there.
Calm, cool, and collected in the boobs.
The first 2 days of Coco's life, I came back from the hospital. I think it was actually my first day home. Lauren came to my house. The first thing she did was observe a feed with Coco. Well, actually, the first thing she did was weigh Coco before she fed so we could see exactly how much she weighed. And then we popped her on the boob and fed her and weighed her after to see exactly how many ounces she took in that full feed.
Aligned with the expectation of how old she is and how much she should be taking at that point.
And as she's feeding, Lauren, or the lactation consultant, is watching and listening, seeing if their latch looks good, if their mouth is open wide enough, they check out if there's any sort of tongue tie going on, and also listen for audible swallows to make sure the baby is not just suckling, but is getting milk and swallowing. It's also so helpful to have someone like you come, because knowing how to handle the baby and hold them and what positions to try.
Is everything, totally.
And I just remember watching you grab my boob and take Coco's head and shove it in her mouth was such a good visual for me for when I'm now on my own and you've left my house.
You've got control.
How am I supposed to do this? Like, I was actually, remembering exactly how you did it and putting her on my boob the way you did it. And I think you need someone in your space handling both your body and your baby to show you.
It makes you feel more confident and comfortable with how you can hold her, how you can control her, how you can help her get the deepest latch with her lips flanged and the right positioning.
And actually, when you came over, you were the second person to tell us that she did have a slight tongue tie. They told us also in the hospital. But what everyone seemed to say at this point, including you, was, she does have a slight tongue tie, but this isn't a problem unless it is either affecting her latch, affecting the pain that you feel in your boob from her latch, affecting how much milk she's able to take.
Exactly.
Any of those things. And at the time, it seemed like there were no problems. Like in her first
There
week of
weren't
feeding,
on
she
the
was fine.
exactly.
One of the early things that happened was probably around week 2, I started to feel these strange pains in my boob, and I was texting you about them. You told me it was called something like a vasospasm.
Mm-hmm.
In between feeds, I was feeling these shooting pains in my boob and nipple area, and Lauren was saying, does your nipple look a little bit white? Like almost to describe it, not white like it has a coating of discharge, but white like the blood has been sucked out of it.
That's exactly what it is. They look like when your face sees a ghost. They look like when all the blood has left the building.
Exactly. And it is a result of a poor latch. So at that point, we went to the pediatrician. We had you come back and look, and everyone was kind of saying, she definitely has a tongue tie, and I think getting this released will probably help. So we did. We got her tongue tie released. That whole process was pretty easy. My understanding is there's not many nerves in that area that's clipped.
It's more that they don't like being held in a certain position when they're getting it done.
Yeah. But we got her tongue tie released, and then feeding kind of went back to normal for a little while. Pretty quickly, we noticed that she had this white coating in her mouth that at first we all thought was milk on her tongue. And the doctor said if you can wipe it off, it's probably milk. And we did wipe her tongue, and a decent amount of it looked like it came off. So we sort of just ignored it. But then fast forward a couple more weeks in, I just had one of those mom's intuition moments where I was sitting with her on the couch. I was feeding. She was really unhappy. Then I pulled her away and I was just holding her, and she yawned in my face, and I got a good look inside of the mouth.
Yeah.
And I could see these white spots on the back of her cheek and on the roof of her mouth. And I thought, this doesn't look like milk. This looks like thrush. And I actually tried to, there was one spot on the inside of her lower lip that I tried to kind of like pick off with my finger, and it did not just wipe off. So I called the doctor. I said, I think we need to come be seen because it looks like thrush. At the same time, the night before, my nipple had been inordinately itchy as I was going to sleep.
I remember. Yes.
It was almost like I remember lying in bed thinking to myself, don't scratch it, don't scratch it. But scratching it felt so good.
Of course.
And I was getting to a point, honestly, where when I would pop her on to nurse and she would latch and she would start sucking on the nipple, it felt like an itch was being scratched. Like she was scratching it for me. So I brought her to the doctor. Immediately, the doctor looks at her and says, oh, yeah, it's thrush. I showed her my nipple and she said, it looks like she's got thrush, which is a yeast infection in your mouth, and she's passing it to your nipple. And so now your nipple has it. So she needs this oral gel that you're going to swipe on a cotton pad around her mouth 4 times a day for 2 weeks. And you need to get your own cream and put it on yourself 4 times a day for 2 weeks. And in the meantime, I would highly recommend do not nurse her directly because you guys are just going to keep passing this back and forth. So you can pump and give her pumped milk during this time. Just wipe off the cream before you put the pumps on. That was really a turning point, I would say, in my nursing journey this time because it really forced me to, in a way that I wasn't previously, get on a schedule.
It did.
When you have a newborn, you could try to go in with the whole, I'm going to nurse them every 2 hours or every 3 hours, but there is just so much cluster feeding and random time of day the baby wants to eat. And if you are nursing, you will probably find in those early days that you are just present and nursing this baby way more often than you thought you were going to be. So when we switched to this pumping schedule and it was like, I'm pumping, I was now able to say, I'm actually just going to pump on a set schedule. I'm going to give myself 3-hour break between pumping, and I am not pumping more frequently than that. And if that's not creating enough milk for her, I was very comfortable offering her formula in between. I honestly do feel that this thrush yeast infection pumping situation was kind of a blessing in disguise for me because as someone who really wanted to control my supply and wanted to have a handle on how many ounces were coming out, how often, pumping is honestly the best way to go.
It's great for a lot of our moms that are dealing with a little bit of anxiety or those sleepier, higher bilirubin, more jaundiced babies. Some moms love having the opportunity to know, I am giving my baby 60 mLs every feed. Obviously, it depends on how old they are. A lot of moms love that. And that's one of the positives to pump. Some moms absolutely hate pumping, will do anything not to pump. And again, aligns with whatever your goals are.
I just want to go back to when Coco was 5 days old because I do feel like I glazed over how quickly I was able to cut out the middle of the night pumping sessions this time. Prior to 5 days, I actually don't think I needed to wake up overnight. By the way, I wasn't really getting like full night's sleep when you're first at home with a
Certainly
baby.
not.
But I don't think I intentionally was pumping in those nighttime hours in those first 4 days because, in the hospital, the baby's still coming to you and nursing overnight.
Sure.
And your milk hasn't even really come in yet. So it wasn't until 5 days when I was like, okay, I'm at home. My nurse is here. Now I want to really be cognizant about how often I'm waking up and how many ounces I'm taking out at each of those times. So I had a plan the first night when she turned 5 days. I said, I'm going to bed. And I remember at this point, I like pumped myself maybe 10:30 p.m. just before I went to bed myself. And then I had set an alarm for 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. And my plan was I'm going to wake up twice overnight. And each time I wake up, I'm going to take out a max of 3 ounces. So 1.5 ounces from each boob. And I had a plan to do it twice. So 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. But that first night that I set the alarm to do it, I remember I woke up by myself without the alarm at some point. And I was lying in bed in the dark thinking, oh my gosh, my boobs feel full. So I hope it's close to 1 a.m. Like, I don't know what time it is, but I really hope it's time for me to pump. And I looked at my clock and it was 3:45 a.m.
I remember that.
And my alarm was going off silently. I hate when that happens with the iPhone, but sometimes it's just going off and not making noise. I said, oh my God, I woke up, I sat up, put on the pump, took out the 3 ounces then, and then went back to bed. And I texted you the next morning and I said, okay, Laura, here's what happened. I had a plan to wake up twice, but I only woke up once. And when I woke up, my boobs were full. They weren't in pain. It wasn't like they were rock hard with a clog in them, but I did it. And I was able to basically get away with just waking up once. So now going into tomorrow, my plan is going to be to just wake up once. Maybe I won't wait as long as 3:45. Maybe I'll do like 2 or 2:30. But now that I know I can go to sleep and wake up one time, I'm not reverting back and waking up twice and, telling my body to make more. My whole point is to wean overnight. So from that point forward, so from 5 days forward, I only had that one middle of the night wake. It only took until Coco was 2 weeks old. So it only took one more week before I completely cut out that one pumping session in the middle of the night. And I did it by just decreasing the amount of ounces I was taking out. So for like 3 days, I took out those 3 ounces. And then once my body was comfortably doing that, I think I just started removing maybe 2.5 ounces for a couple days and then 2 ounces for a couple days. And eventually I just started pushing the time back too.
You worked a lot faster than I expected you to, given your history, honestly. I was surprised at how not uncomfortable you were. But basically, the overall principle of weaning is you want to remove less milk, which will in turn make less milk, right? So the opposite of what we were talking about earlier. So generally, I like to say make a change every 3 to 7 days. See how your breasts feel. For example, if you're making 4 ounces per pump for the next 3 to 7 days, take 2 ounces out. So I don't want you to pay attention necessarily to time, but ounces. So if you are, making 4 ounces for 3 to 7 days, then turn the pump off once you reach 2 ounces for 3 to 7 days. And the reason I had this range is because I want you to literally check in with your breasts. How do they feel? Am I super uncomfortable? Because if you're super uncomfortable, we're increasing the pressure and inflammation in the breast. And that can then, of course, lead to clogs and inflammation and symptoms of mastitis. But I do want to mention that this was what Lucie did because you wanted to, right? You were okay not necessarily making 100% milk supply. It was your goal and it was important to you to get that middle of the night sleep while you had your night nurse. For anyone that is just starting out, the recommendation would be to wake every 3 hours. But because you were okay with supplementing with formula, we were able to actually achieve this goal.
So now the big question I've been getting from people is how did you get your body to a place where you're making milk at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. and no other times of the day? So yeah. I want to walk through, get into the weeds of exactly what I did because as I said, I was on an exclusively pumping schedule and I think that was really helpful here. I was on a schedule, and I think if people are listening and you really want to make note of this, actually write down what I'm saying in terms of times of day and ounces because that will be helpful. I was on a schedule where I was pumping every 3 hours starting at 7 a.m. 7 a.m., 10 a.m., 1 p.m., 4 p.m., 7 p.m., and 10 p.m. Nothing overnight. Remember, this is after I had weaned off the night feeds. So I'm essentially pumping 6 times per day. And during each of those pump sessions, I am removing a total of 3 ounces. I added up in my head what that means in terms of how much milk am I taking out in a 24-hour period. And that adds up to 18 ounces. So once again, this is for a person who is combo feeding a baby, because I don't even
Sure.
think 18 ounces is enough
No, it
in
is
the
not.
day.
It depends on the baby's age, but not for Coco at the time.
Not for Coco at the time. She was definitely getting formula overnight and also sometimes during the day. So this was just the amount of milk I wanted to make was capped at 18 ounces in a day. Forget the 10 p.m. feed right now, because that was the last thing I phased out. That was just my like nighttime. I'm going to pump a little bit to get some milk out so I can make it till the next morning. If you just look at the 7 a.m., 10 a.m., 1, 4, and 7, that's 5 feeds in a day. And I basically want to keep the 7 a.m. where it is and the 7 p.m. where it is. So now I'm looking at this whole middle of the day, those 3 feeds in the middle of the day, the 10, 1, and 4. Those 3 feeds are the feeds that I'm trying to eliminate and phase out. Remember, each of those times I'm taking 3 ounces. So I'm taking 3 ounces at 10, 3 ounces at 1 p.m., and 3 ounces at 4 p.m. That means between those hours, I'm taking a total of 9 ounces of milk out of me. If I want to scale back to first turning those 3 sessions into just 2 sessions, the best way to do it is to consolidate those 3 pump times into 2 pump times while simultaneously trying to keep the number of ounces you are removing the same, at least at first. So if you look at those pump sessions, 10, 1, and 4, and I'm taking 3 ounces each of those times. After I was doing that comfortably for a few days, I changed those pumping times instead of 10, 1, and 4 to just be 11 and 3. But at each of those 2 sessions, instead of taking 3 ounces, I was now taking about 4 to 4.5 ounces out. Because then, yes, I was pumping fewer times during the day, but I was still making the same amount in that time window. And for a few days, I continued on that pattern until I felt like I was comfortably doing that, at which point I was able to slowly diminish how many ounces I was taking out at each of those feeds. So at a certain point, I got myself to a place where at the 11 a.m. and the 3 p.m. pump session, I was back to only taking 3 ounces out. And now my goal is let me combine those into 1 feed. So what's the midpoint between 11 and 3? It's 1 p.m. So as soon as I felt comfortable at the 11 and 3, I swapped it to 1 p.m. and I tried going, let me just pump once during the day at 1 p.m. and try to take out 6 ounces during this time, which once again, that's still the same amount of ounces I had previously been taking comfortably, but I'm just consolidating it into 1 feed. Once I did that comfortably for a few days, I was then able to diminish the amount of ounces. And actually, the way that I completely cut out that middle of the day feed, it was another egregious error on my part where I had set an alarm to pump at my 1 p.m. pump, but before I knew it, my alarm never went off and it was 4 p.m. and I had
I
a oh
remember
my
that.
gosh moment. I just totally forgot to pump today and my boobs actually feel fine. I just remembered feeling like I'm obviously trying to wean. And my goal here is to make less and less milk and only make milk at certain times of the day. But I really need to be listening to my body throughout this journey. And I need to just be
100%.
touching my boobs all the time to see, am I in any pain? If I'm in any pain, I'm not going to push it. If I need to remove milk, I need to remove milk. If I feel generally okay, then I could push it longer. And that was something that was so helpful about working with you was I would text you and ask, like, do I need to do this? Do I need to do that? And you would continue to remind me to check in with myself and see how I felt.
How do you feel? Exactly.
And there was only one moment in my journey when I started to feel a little bit of pain in one of my boobs. It felt like I was maybe getting some inflammation. I don't know if it was a clogged duct or what. I had come back from dinner one night and I just felt like my boob was hot and heavy, and compared to the other one that clearly had drained milk during the pumping session, like not much was coming out of this other side. I'm so happy I had you, because my thought of what to do when I have a clog is let me massage it, let me put the vibrator on it, let me get a hot towel and squeeze it. And can you just tell people what you told me to do instead?
100%. So I'm so glad you brought that up because so many moms deal with this, and stay off Google. The internet can tell you anything, right? But the most important thing where you're having any inflammation in the breast at all is to think of your breast like a sprained ankle. We want to use ice and high dose ibuprofen. Whether the inflammation is from a shallow latch, an improper flange size, suction settings that are too strong, keeping your breasts full for too long, which is what likely happened with you, we want to be very gentle with our breasts. No deep massage, no heat. Why no heat? Heat increases blood flow. It can worsen inflammation. So we want to do ice and high dose ibuprofen. I'm talking about 800 milligrams of ibuprofen with a meal to protect your belly, as long as it's medically safe for you to take ibuprofen. Why ibuprofen, not Tylenol? Because ibuprofen targets inflammation in a way that Tylenol does not. So the inflammation in the breast is usually what is causing the problem. And why do some moms get a fever with that breast pain? It's because when there's inflammation anywhere in the body, when you have the flu or COVID or a stomach bug or an infected toenail, you don't get antibiotics, right? Nobody gets antibiotics for the flu or for COVID or a stomach bug. Your body sends white cells to the scene. And in that cascade of reactions that occur, it is normal for your body to elevate the body's temperature to make it an inhabitable environment for whatever virus or inflammation we're trying to fight. So even when moms get breast pain from mastitis and a fever, it's not necessarily infectious. It's stemming from a normal but really unfortunate place of inflammation. So the best thing you can do is high dose ibuprofen. I relate to you so much. I'm in a bunch of mom groups that with all like well-intended moms of people saying, my breast hurts, I have pain, I have fever, I have a clogged duct. And one mom said, put a Theragun on your breast. And that is the only way you can get out that clog. I cannot stress enough. No vibrators, no breast massagers, no deep massage, no Theraguns. Think about it. That makes the inflammation worse. So in your situation, you probably just left the breast a little too full, a little too long, and you start to have some swelling and inflammation in the milk ducts.
So I took 3 Advil that night.
Perfect.
And I slept with cold in it. And actually before bed, the one thing I did, which was not deep massaging, but I did put on my hospital grade pump to just get a little stronger suction. And I made sure to just remove some milk. I don't think I was trying to suck out a clog or anything like that, but
perfect,
to make sure milk was coming out, and then slept with cold. And I actually woke up once in the middle of the night to replenish the cold and put like a new ice pack on. Took the 800 milligrams of ibuprofen, and I woke up in the morning and the pain was gone. And it was
amazing.
It was
Love
like magic. And it was
Yes.
really different from the 2 times with Milo that I got, quote, mastitis. You know, I thought I had an infection and had a fever, immediately started deep massaging, putting warm towels on it, and then called my doctor and was just handed out antibiotics twice.
Sometimes it is infectious, right? Sometimes, very rarely, but sometimes after 24 to 48 hours of that supportive care that we just spoke about, if it is getting worse or it is not getting better, sometimes it can turn into a consolidated bacterial abscess. And that does require antibiotics. Absolutely, there is a time and a place for antibiotics for breast pain and fever, but it's not, according to the Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine, protocol number 36, it is not the latest evidence-based practice. The thing is, you know, in medicine, everything is constantly changing, right? So we need to adapt to what the latest evidence-based practice is.
So where am I now with Coco? After I was able to phase out those 3 daytime pumping sessions, and I was able to just be pumping 7 a.m., 7 p.m., and then a little bit at 10 or 11 p.m. before bed. I slowly got rid of the 10 or 11 p.m. one by consolidating it with the 7 p.m. one. So I just kind of slowly pushed the 7 p.m. one back a little bit and moved that one earlier until I was able to just turn those 2 into 1. And then I got to a place where I was literally just doing 7 and 7. And for a short period of time, after the thrush cleared up and nipple yeast infection cleared up, I was able to be nursing her directly on me during those 2 times a day. However, what was happening, as was probably expected, was that because I had completely stopped my supply all day, aside from these 2 times a day, it was pretty short-lived that I was able to get a full 3 ounces during those 2 feeds. Once again, supply and demand. I told my body there's not a huge demand, so the supply is dropping. What was happening was I was putting Coco on to nurse at 7 a.m. I would feel the milk was flowing. It would start coming out, but it would be so short-lived that, yes, there was more in it. And if I put on a pump, I probably could have gotten more out. But as I said, I really didn't want to be like nursing then pumping. So I was just nursing. And what was ending up happening was eventually, once the flow stopped flowing, she didn't want to work too hard and suck. So she would start getting fussy and I would end up giving her a bottle of formula. And after days and days and days of doing this, it was almost like every single time she was feeding for shorter and shorter periods of time and getting fussy quicker and quicker. Eventually it got to a point where I said, now I'm just making more work for myself because now I'm trying to nurse her, but then I also have to prepare a bottle. So instead I switched to, you know what, I'll just give her a full bottle during this feed. And at some other point during the morning when I'm not holding her, I'll put on the pumps and I'll do the pumping then. And so at some point I had switched to just pumping 7 and 7. And the state I'm at now is that so little is coming out during both of those times. Sometimes I'm getting a total of a half an ounce. So like a quarter of an ounce from each side is coming out. Any day now, it will be done. Any day now, I'm just going to stop. I feel so confident in the formula that we're using. She seems to be doing great on it and is growing perfectly and is not super gassy or fussy or having any digestive issues. So I don't feel the need to ramp up my supply. I really want to encourage people to reach out to an IBCLC if you are going through this process, because I cannot overstate how useful it is, and to have someone like that in your back pocket, literally, as it, to be able to text during this process is invaluable. This is covered by my insurance. So
that's the biggest thing.
Yes. It's like kind of crazy. Sometimes I think about that and I'm like, wow, this is the most helpful thing ever. And I did not pay.
Yes. So I currently work at Milk Street Lactation. We offer in-office visits, home visits, and then we actually do virtual visits nationwide. I had a call with a mom in LA last week. We are covered in network with Aetna and United Healthcare, and we're trying to get involved with many other insurances. It is quite a process, so it takes a little while for each one. But this is a service that is an unbelievable resource to moms that you are covered for. So even in your situation where you knew what you were doing for Milo, why not get a weighted feed? Get the best control, confidence, comfortability holding the baby with positioning. Confirm that she is taking X mLs per feed with a weighted feed and give you, mom, the confidence that you need at little to zero cost. Stay off the internet. You'll find anything you want to find, which might be the wrong thing for you. So it's invaluable. And
I feel like I gained not only an expert and a lactation consultant that I can text and ask questions and bring on the podcast, but I actually made a really good friend who I now run into in the Whole Foods parking lot.
I know. I love you, Luce. I'm so happy that we met. And you are such an expert in this now. You don't know that you are until you're in it. And now you can tell your girlfriends, no, don't put heat on it. Don't put that Theragun on your breast. So you are an expert now.
Thank you so much. I'm really, really so grateful. And it feels so good and so different to this early on with the baby be at a stage where I feel very freed. My goal was really to get to the 2-month mark, providing as much breast milk as I could, maybe not as I could, but providing as much as she needed, as my goal was, for 2 months until she got her shots and her vaccines. And I felt like she was a little bit less vulnerable. And we've made it there. And she is
proud of you.
Vaccinated up. I'm proud of myself. And I'm so grateful that I had you in my corner this whole time. And thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It was awesome to be here.
Thank you so much for tuning in to The Real Stuff. I'm Lucie Fink. Don't forget to follow the show on social media at The Real Stuff Pod. And if you're liking these episodes, please head over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a written review. It helps the show so much. And if you're feeling called to come on the show, visit luciefink.com/apply and tell us your story. We'll see you next week for another intimate conversation on The Real Stuff.